Good evening. You are watching Beyond the Headlines on Freedom Square TV. We are reaching you from our Enugu studios. Of course, Enugu is in southeast Nigeria. Pre-colonial Igbo societies had traditional institutions for conflict management, peacemaking, and peace building. These institutions were influential bodies for the maintenance of social order, cohesion, and conflict management, and even conflict resolution. They were also used for preserving cultural values, coordination of social and economic activities. They include the Umunna, the lineage group, Umuada, the married daughters, Umunne, immediate family members, age grades, time unions, traditional rulers, council of elders, Ndinzenozo, sacred and spiritual institutions like the shrines and the oracles. But as communal conflicts intensified over land, leadership tussles, boundary disputes, and resource control, the question remains, how effective are our traditional institutions in conflict management? To help us unpack this, I'm being joined by Professor Ozonia Ujielo. Ozonia Ujielo is the United Nations Resident Coordinator and representative of the United Nations Secretary General in Rwanda. Prof, it's an honor to have you with us Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you very much.
It's been a long time.
It has been. Hello, viewers.
You're already growing beard.
Indeed.
Okay, Prof, let's get started. Our society, the Igbo society, has always relied on its traditional institutions. The Igwes, the Council of Elders, the chair, the age grade system, women group like Umuada. They've always helped in mediating disputes and even setting standards in communities and even maintaining harmony. From your perspective, as a conflict resolution scholar and practitioner, how do these institutions compare with formal state mechanisms in terms of conflict management?
Thank you very much, Uche. I think the answer is in your question when you use the word formal state. Because what you already imply in your choice of words is that there are two conceptions of the state. The formal state, which is the inherited governing structure, which you inherited for the colonial authorities. But by using the word informal, you're also applying there's an informal state, which is what our traditional institutions represent. And I would dare say that that is the root of the problem. How can something that's about the cosmogony of a people, a reflection of your own autochthony, a reflection of your history, your ways of life, your value system become informal? And what you have borrowed and copied from another part of the world becomes formal. That is the crux of the matter. Because in our in the African state, these are the structures and systems of society and the structures and systems of governance. They haven't gone away. So what has happened is that people go through the formal structures of governance because by virtue of our inherited governing structure, there's a local government authority. There's even a governor who by the chieftaincy act or edict of the state or law can decide that you are not recognized. Recognized by whom? Recognized by a governor who is not part of your community, even when your community has chosen you and enthroned you as their Igwe. So you see, there are systemic structural challenges that impact the effectiveness of these institutions. So what you then have is that in the context of contestation, disputants may then have different platforms to contest their dispute. They might go to the police station. The police can actually arrest the Igwe when a disputant claims that the Igwe has infringed on their rights. The police are not respecting the Igwe as a personification of the values of the people and the community. The person can go to the state authority, can even litigate against the Igwe in the courts of law. So we have not taken the systems of governance we are familiar with, we grew up with, as the platform for first level dispute resolution. And so since you can do forum shopping by going to any of this, it's not surprising that you have the challenges you mentioned. And lastly, of course, is that chieftaincy in Igboland, unfortunately, has become in some communities, an offer for the highest bidder. So there is also a real question around the quality of those who have made our Igwes. In some of our communities, there's a history, there's a tradition, it's codified, you follow. But in other communities, it's gone to the highest bidder. And so if you go to the highest bidder, and by Igbo custom and tradition, to be an Ozo, to be an Igwe, to come from a selected kindred, there are certain value attributes you must bring to the table. And if the person doesn't have it, you can't suddenly manufacture it because you are Igwe. So these are the structural problems we see in our society. If they're not working well, it's not because the institution was not designed to work well. It's because our modern practice, unfortunately, begins to undermine the effectiveness of the institution.
Now that we've just spoken about the Igwe, and that takes me to what I press to be an anomaly, a big anomaly in the way traditional rulers are appointed, are elected, or selected. But one troubling issue is that most traditional rulers in Igboland now live abroad. People have talked about it, but it's not abating. From your experience and wide knowledge, is it proper by any standard that a traditional ruler elected to superintend over the cultural values of people should live in a land, in a clime that is almost 10,000 miles away from his home, and comes home once in a while and is the traditional ruler, and people still defer to him, and government still recognize?
The problem is not just that they live outside their domain. The problem is that the currency for appointment as Igwe is the currency of money. And people will say, as Igwe, people come to you for solutions to their problems, social, economic, and it ought to have a means. And then, of course, the Igwe is supposed to be a moneyed person to represent the views of the community. That problem started 30, 40 years ago, when people who had money, who had no other sign of distinction beyond the fact of wealth, but whose source of wealth actually was questionable. In the 90s and early 2000s, we knew several people that the allegations around them, when they were in some kind of economic activity that in a normal state would be regarded as criminal. But because in some particular instances, they actually had money and got the legitimate Igwe deposed.
Yes.
So that they could become Igwe. Now, if somebody has bought the Igwe ship with money, who are you to question whether they are located in their domain or located outside? So the challenge for me is in our value systems, that we have decided that in our community, the person with the largest access to money, to resources, is the person that personifies or represents our community. The historicity of our traditional institutions in Igboland was never about money. We honored people who did well.
Yes.
We honored them in different ways. But to be the Igwe of your community, there were a little bit more. The personal attributes, the personal recognition, the selflessness. You put others beyond self. That's how you became Igwe. It was never about money. And then those with the resources rallied around and supported the Igwe. There's a competition in Igboland that the Igwe has to be the richest person among us. So if that competition defines who we are, well, that's your value. And if this reflects your value system, it reflects also what you consider as priority. So you have to endure the external Igwe because you've chosen the wrong set of priorities, the wrong set of value systems. Our hope must be that as we re-enthrone proper value systems in Igboland, as we begin to reaffirm who we are as Igbo and the things we hold dear for our community, that we begin to go back to what we were known for in terms of the selection of who are Igbo and chiefs. Look at the people who are being honored as chiefs today. Tell me in any community where the best teacher has been made a chief in Igboland. Where? Tell me where in the community in Igboland where the most selfless citizen, whether he's a taxi driver or he works in the non-state sector, has been acknowledged. They acknowledge people with money, or some cases people with distinction. So you're mixing that, but you're not going to the root of recognizing those who offer service. Let me end on this point. We saw that in the quality of recognition that our national authorities have given to some of our citizens who have truly excelled. They've excelled in sports and we've honored them. And people are asking the question, but we have Nigerians who have labored in different fields of endeavor, unsung, unknown, and no one has actually recognized any one of those. But they're offering those because of the visibility and the presence that they have. Which the problem is our value system. And if we can't re-enthrone the values of which we are known as Ndibo, as we say in Igbolands, Miliana will continue to beat us, unfortunately. And so that's why we're discussing this issue today.
Yes, and if you are asked to, by any stretch of thoughts, suggest a way out of this anomaly, because our people have departed, like you said, decades ago, from our norms, our values, our cultural heritage. How do we get back to the beginning? Is there anything you can think of that perhaps, if properly applied, could bring a bit of sanity?
You know, in mediation theory, we talk about the legitimacy of the mediator. So if the person, the Igwe, what the Igwe represents, is something that is anathema to the values of the community, by implication, the Igwe is not an acceptable interlocutor to intermediate in a conflict between sections of the community. So structurally, you may have an Igwe, the person might call a meeting, and people will show up because of this weakness in the foundational structure. So where do we start? The problem seems significant because it's become widespread. So we must start by how do we go back to the basics? What is it that we value? You and I were in college at a time where if you call a meeting of communities of Monna or prominent people in the community, if you are an academic, people will ask you, Ego Nekoji, can you ego? We started to worship money. So can we begin by reaffirming the principles that make us who we are? Na anibo okenyada abuchaso lacha. The principle is that you must be a person of truth. You must be a person of your word. We must begin to honor integrity and recognition. Money is important, but money is a means. Money cannot be the end. It's a means to an end. So at different levels, state institutions, to recognize all of those, recognize industry, recognize enterprise. Because the manifestation of this new value system is that every young person doesn't recognize hard labor. They look at people who are wealthy, who have money, and they want to be like them. But they haven't inquired what they did to improve and empower themselves. Our societies, our organizations. So it looks overwhelming, but I would argue that that's where we must start. In our traditional institutions, in our places of worship, in our schools. Let's reaffirm the proper absolute values. But more lastly, let us celebrate those who reflect these new values. We don't acknowledge, we don't celebrate them, we don't give them visibility. By putting them up as the way to go, perhaps that's how we can restart. It will take a long time, but how do they say it? This old adage that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. We must start from somewhere.
The step will be backwards.
You have to be forward moving step, not a backward moving step.
Yes. Conflicts in Igbolands today often center around the land disputes. Traditional leadership tussles, which has become almost endemic. That one community got an Igbo after 20 years of constant trouble, boundary clashes, and resource struggles. Some escalating into violence, displacing families and destabilizing their communities. Could you help us understand the root causes of these communal conflicts in contemporary Igbo beyond what I just said? And why do they seem to persist despite all manner of conflict interventions and strategies?
You know, and we have to recognize that these issues, the manifestation may be chieftaincy conflicts or land disputes, but actually these are about socioeconomic issues. The social and economic organization of our society, the contestation for livelihood, for opportunity. When opportunities are limited for people, then they start looking for different opportunities. Our institutions have been instrumentalized and politicized. And because they're instrumentalized and politicized, even those who know what is right, you try to find recourse to issues that interest them because they have access to decision makers, whether the decision makers are in government, they're in politics, they are in the economy. So it's this societal challenge has to challenge all of us to start rethinking. Every community used to have customer records.
Yeah.
I don't know what is the state of the customary court system in Asati today. The one in my hometown between Obelago and Owa, my father used to be chair of the customary court. The building has just collapsed, which makes me feel that the customary courts no longer exist.
It exists somehow, but not
in full practice.
Yes.
Because it's in the customary courts you reaffirm the customs and traditions of our people. It's the customary court that you codify all of the elements of what you understand by virtue of our customs. Those who are leaders in societies and communities all will now need to step up. Because if you create a system of resolution that increasingly applies to all of our social practices, our ways of life, then perhaps we can begin a framework that helps us. The good news is that in our societies, we have institutions of which you're a prominent member, like ICMC, that begins to offer mediation practices. Why do we need institutions like ICMC in the social sector? It's because our social institutions, like the traditional rulership, are not effective. So issues around land are an economic question about use, about opportunity, about transformation. So why do you take an issue like that to the High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court in the last 20, 30 years? Because people have no confidence in the social institutions. If we have confidence in the social institutions, that's where the land dispute must end. Then from a legal perspective, you want to create a precedent around it, you can go litigate it. So I don't want to be pessimistic, Uche. I want to be very optimistic to say that by reinterrogating all of these issues and by hoping that through programs like yours, there's a lot more interest in reaffirming the power and importance of traditional institutions, we can find solutions to these issues.
Okay. It was thought, and maybe people are still thinking, that town unions could offer a kind of a more civilized approach to conflict management in communities, given the way traditional rulers are now reading themselves. Like we talk some, in fact, you don't see them. So, but again, the issue of who becomes the town union executive is already again politicized. And suddenly there's the diaspora group that now exert more influence, so to speak. People, they've not been home for 10 years, but Igbo will speak in a village and they say, they've not spoken. Because they're the one bringing, of course, you know the value of our currency. That if an Igbo boy drops just $100,
that's at least 153,000 naira.
Somebody is struggling to pay 10,000 naira and he just dropped it, as like that. So, would you think that this emergent town unions and diaspora group, that instead of helping, have even complicated conflict management in local communities?
I think we must accept that the intervention of town unions is a reaction to the ineffectiveness of mediatory institutions in our communities. And because they are not effective, you create a vacuum. And those town unions are trying to fill that vacuum. In most communities, the town union is an instrument for transformation. They actually help. Particularly now that we need resources to help transform our communities, the town union has become the backbone of development initiatives in most communities. I would think that perhaps there are just a few cases where the town union takes a position as distinct from that of the Igwe or the Igwe in council. I think in most communities in Igbolands, the town unions are a force for good. They are positive influencers. They contribute to development. What I would hope is that beyond the contribution of town unions in terms of the social economic change in the family, because most times it's about money for family members, that we begin to think about development initiatives in the community that you bring the town unions. even if those development initiatives also allow them to receive some economic returns. It's about transforming remittances for development. That's a discourse that is not taking place anywhere. So right now, remittances are just a means for survival, a means of economic transformation at the family unit level, not for the broader development perspectives. So I would encourage that in most of our communities, they are a positive force for good, and we should use them in those respects. The key is our traditional leaders to step up. The Igwes should begin to see themselves as moral beacons and not become seduced into getting into the dust of conflict and taking sides in the issues that happen at the community level. And that's not an easy ask for the average Igwe.
Well, if you know what I know, there were times when traditional rulers had respect and union people exactly were bound to obey them. Today, Prof, and surprisingly so, if you go to most communities, you find that there's a gulch, there's a rift, there's a valley between the traditional ruler and the town union. In fact, sometimes the president of the town union says he's superior to the Igwe, that he's the political head. And so you find them working at cross purposes. So this institution that actually should engage in conflict management, peacemaking, even peace building, you find them now becoming source of conflict. How do you think that this rivalry between Igwe and the town union president could be?
I think there are two dimensions that I see. The first dimension is that the position of Igwe in our current frame by the legislation, it's one that requires moral authority. It's not the Igwe in the African state. In the African state, the Igwe had authority. The Igwe was the moral center of the community, not anymore. In our organization in Igbolands today, the administration of the community coheres around the town union architecture, that leadership. So we need to reinvent the role of the Igwe as a moral authority, the role of the Igwe as a unifier. You mentioned the point social cohesion. The Igwe is a point of social cohesion. If the Igwe is involved in disputes in the community and is taking sides, how can the Igwe be a moral compass? So the second point then is, how are we supporting new Igwes or current Igwes to understand these functions? How are we training them? You know, people make an assumption that once you're an Igwe, you're an authority in conflict management.
Yeah.
It's not true. Because many of the Igwes have distinguished themselves in some field or the other, mostly in economic fields. They have money, they become Igwe. I used to live in Ghana. There was a big conflict in Ghana in the early 2000s when the king of the Dagombas in northern Ghana was killed. The Ashanti head, the most prominent traditional ruler in Ghana, was chairperson of a 3-person committee of eminent kings. And these were, antiquity in antiquity. Part of my role, I was technical advisor to the Ashanti head. And I would sit on the side watching them mediate the conflict between the Andanese and their Abudus in the conflict. And I will be taking notes. And then after I'll have a one-on-one with the Ashanti and I'll say, my father, this is what I saw. This is what I saw. Next time, can you do this? Can you do this? Of course, I wasn't telling him he was wrong.
Yeah.
But I was offering comparative experience. I'm not an Igwe, but as someone who is an authority in mediation practice, as someone who studied it around the world, I could offer comparative experience. So where is that support for the Igwes in Igboland? Who provides the accompaniment? We don't accompany them in the work they do. We don't provide them any training. We don't provide them any support. So when they fall short, then we blame them. We have to provide that support for them, I think. Otherwise, these mistakes will continue to repeat themselves.
Okay, we'll take a short break. But when we come back, we'll be looking at the major challenges these institutions face in playing a credible role in conflict management. Time was when the Umuada had influence. Time was when the age grade had influence. Time was when even the masquerades had influence. And time was when even the Umona. Today, the Umona dances to the tune of the money bag, whatever he is. If he comes home and he's gotten money, Umuna will just prostrate.
Yes.
And whatever he says, instead of having institutions, you now have individuals who are becoming more influential. And instead of managing conflict, they adjudicate. They give instruction. They say you are guilty, you are not guilty. And of course, people begin to say, no, Kugo, what else are you going to say? So we'll be back shortly. Don't go anywhere.
This is Freedom Square TV.
This is Freedom Square TV.
This is Freedom Square TV.
Freedom Square TV is your gateway to powerful business exposure and advertisement. Yes, you heard me right. I said it's your gateway to powerful business exposure and advertisement. We deliver their message to the right audience through professional media coverage, creative business promotion, and targeted advertising solution. Partner with us to grow your brand, boost and increase your visibility.
Freedom Square TV delivers accurate, timely news covering politics, business, and society, keeping viewers entertained, informed, and empowered every day. Keep watching Freedom Square TV.
Freedom Square TV, where script comes to life.
You are still watching Beyond the Headlines on Freedom Square TV. My guest is still Professor Ozanne Ojielo. Prof. Beyond Igbolands, we've seen conflicts across Nigeria. There was the time I had the privilege to do a small job for UNDP on header farmers clashes in Benue, Enugu, and Ebonyi. The issue of insurgency, militancy, and ethnic tensions. We just discussed institutions in Igboland that in the past were used to manage conflict. What lesson can Nigeria draw from the Igbo institutions, those institutions of Igboland, that could help? Because I believe the farmer clashes can be handled, not the way it's being done today. Gun to gun, knife to knife. Is there any way we can apply those kind of dialogue or even some traditional methods in handling these national conflicts?
This is a very significant problem. The challenge is that we are ignoring the structural foundations of these problems, and we are focusing on the manifestations. The structural challenges are multiple. Take the Lake Chad Basin. Lake Chad Basin served more than 5 countries. It was a source of significant economic activity, farmers, herders, fisher folk, all kinds of persons. It's drying up, less than 1/8 of its former size. All the millions of people that Lake Chad Basin served have no means of livelihood anymore. And they're all living. The herders that used to feed their cattle on the Lake Chad Basin are looking for fresh water sources. They're moving southwards. That is a structural problem. You have desertification, not just in northern Nigeria, across the entire Sahel belt. And the challenge of desertification, first, is there's a question of water. Second, food insecurity. Third, water scarcity. Fourth, energy scarcity as well. And what are they doing? They're all moving southwards. So for something that is very structural and they're moving southwards, it was different from the 1960s, where we had regulated cattle movements in search of pasture. And then you had the cattle routes. The problem is much more massive than that. And what has then happened is that politicians have gone into the mix and begun to manipulate something that is a structural, economic, and climatic condition. It is climatic, it's not going to change. You look at the rainfall patterns across the Sahel countries, you look at how hot they've become. Even human habitation is challenged there. Politicians are now manipulating these structural economic issues and giving all kinds of interpretations. And politicians then, either you're supporting one side or the other. So what is needed first is cool heads. Can we sit down as a society and discuss these structural problems and find the common solutions to them? But in the context of elections and politics, nobody wants to be a cool head. So people want to mobilize for votes on the basis of outbidding, of manipulating sentiments. We've got to be very, strategic in understanding these issues, because if we are, like you said, solutions are there. Dialogue is one of them. Economic opportunities is another. So all these young men who are, in quotes, terrorists, in 2016, in my then position as Director for Governance and Peace Building in Africa for UNDP, my team conducted a study of terrorism in many parts of Africa. We interviewed Al-Shabaab terrorists in Somalia and Nairobi. We interviewed those Islamic states in Central Africa, in Sudan, in Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger. Do you know what came through? 95% of them had never read a passage in the Quran. 95% had never read a passage. They didn't understand anything in the Quran. For majority of them, it was economic. Opportunity to change their lives. For others, it was social. I gained respect with the gun. I was respected in my community. For others, it was opportunity for them to participate with their friends, influence of friends. So something that is economic and social, you want to address it with security prescriptions. It's wrong. It's not going to happen. So we need to just step back, keep the politics aside, and address the issues. And then the politicians who are the ones manipulating it, we need to have a solution. How do you address the politicians and educate the public on all of those? So dialogue is just one. Where are our governments in trying to address the economic opportunities? Sometimes, to be honest with you, my dear brother, I feel a little scandalized when I come home and people are saying they are doing empowerment and you're giving people some just basics. You're not giving them any skills. You're giving Okada, okay, means of transport is one, but no basic skills. And you're doing palliative. And palliative is what? They give you food today, they give you food tomorrow. And I'm like, these politicians actually want to create socio-economic transformation in Africa? Because these problems, Uche, these problems are not going away. These problems are with us. So you look at countries like Mali, like Burkina Faso, like Niger, parts of Mauritania, parts of Senegal. These ISWAP and other affiliated groups are mixing with other groups with legitimate grievances against the state because of economic exclusion. So the state is not in contestation. And as we speak in Nigeria, increasingly, the Nigerian state is contested territory because you're seeing these terrorists with armaments that frighten you compared to what the state have. So I hope that we have a deeper discussion beyond the politicization to try to understand these issues.
You are the UN resident coordinator in Rwanda, a country with its own history of conflict and reconciliation. What comparative insights do you think Nigeria can derive from, particularly the Igbolands, from the example of the Rwanda crisis?
This is really a fascinating question. After the genocide, so Rwandans will tell you, today I get reminded all the time that the UN abandoned Rwanda in the hour of need. I get reminded of that literally every week when I travel to parts of the country. So Rwandans adopted 3 things. They said, number 1, we are on our own as Rwandans. We decide to be united in whatever we do. 3, we must be ambitious in whatever we do. So that's why for Rwanda, the logic of genocide denial is a big issue. Because the society is fragile. Nigerian society is also fragile. We have different narratives. For some, the narrative began with the Civil War, particularly if you come from Igbolands. For some, the narratives began before the Civil War, in terms of the circumstances that led to the first coup. For some, the narrative has mutated in different parts of Nigeria. So every part of Nigeria has a grievance. Can we begin with a common historical, social understanding of the issues? They say in Igboland, we need a common narrative of what happened. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the chairperson, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he identified 4 levels of truth. The personal truth, The truth of your experience, nobody can take it away from you. The social or narrative truth, that's the group truth, because that's the truth that groups have. It may be wrong in our views, but that's what they believe as their truth. The factual or forensic truth, that's the one that lawyers will prove to you. Is it factual? Is it forensic? And unfortunately, most times we focus on the factual and the forensic, but they identify the fourth level of truth, the healing or restorative truth. So, what is the healing or restorative truth about Nigeria and where we're coming from and where we're going? If we can identify a healing or restorative truth in Nigeria, that's the foundational. Number two, in Rwanda, they said, for our society, we need to adopt our own homegrown solutions. So what we have borrowed from the colonialists works up to a point. And in the global community where we are today, this is the time to question all notions of what we borrow from colonialism, our forms of government, our forms of organization. So look at the forms of governance or democracy. It's not autochthonous. It's borrowed from the experience of the Westminster system of government. So we tried the parliamentary style. Now we are trying the American style. That's not intrinsic to our society. Because if you talk about governance that is intrinsic to our society, first question is who needs to be at the table. And then it brings us back to the question of chieftaincy and other institutions. But institutions that are modified for the present time. So you don't exclude, particularly women and other groups that we used to exclude. So what are our homegrown solutions? So beginning from our forms of governance, our forms of social organization, how we checked on each other, how we held each other accountable. The other thing is Rwanda have what they call imihigo, performance contract. From the district level, the cell level to the minister, they all sign with the president. There's a national dialogue with Musichiriano every year. From any part of Rwanda, you can call into the national dialogue and complain about a minister. A minister in Rwanda gives you their business card, their cell number is there. You call the minister, answers. In Nigeria, tell me which minister you have their number, unless you are well connected like them. In Rwanda, they don't give you official cars. The state pays 50% of the price of your car. You pay the other 50%, and there they recover it from your salary. So you humanize governance. So ministers drive without escorts. They drive by themselves. They may have a police escort if they're going for official function, but they drive by themselves. The president himself drives in only a 5-car convoy. 2 of the cars are security cars, escort and the rear, and he drives without siren. So when President Kagame is passing, you won't know. All you will see is that the police guys at the intersection stop you. 3 minutes later, you see a 5-car convoy and they speed through. Sometimes his window is wound down, so you see it is him, you wave to him. Look at the quality, even our local government chairmen are driving in long convoys. So there are fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves. The last point I want to make is about financing. We have been wounded on development finance, that these foreigners love us so much they want to give us money to transform ourselves. My dear fellow Nigerians, not anymore. The context has changed. It did not start with US aid that is abolished. It didn't start with US aid. It started 2 years ago. Just that what has happened with US aid was more dramatic. The funding is not coming anymore. Do you know what it means? We're on our own. We are on our own. We have to develop ourselves, buy our own resources, by our own effort with our own strategies. If we can't decide what is good for us and put our money where our mouth is, if we can't recognize that somebody like you, Uche, you are an entrepreneur, you're an SME in Igbolands in Nigeria. If we can create opportunities that help you thrive, because we offer employment to people, why would we be looking for a foreigner outside to come and invest when we have not created opportunities for you? The investment has to be for you. So what I lament, Uche, I look at a country like Rwanda. It has nothing compared to even a Enugu state. It has nothing compared to the average Nigerian state. But the system works because of the accountability. You know, a minister can go to a bar on a Friday and get drunk and is locked up in prison that weekend and goes to court on Monday. And that's the Monday the minister resigns. I took a chief of staff to the prime minister to drinks at the Nigerian restaurant. He came with his younger brother. He said to me, my brother will drive. I want to drink with you. You're my friend. Because if the police stop him, he must stop. It doesn't matter who you are. And if you are drunk, you stayed the weekend in prison, then you are charged to court on the Monday. He brought his younger brother, so he ate and drank to his heart's content. The younger brother did not drink at all and drove him home. So it's about the values. What are the value systems that define Igboland? Because you're talking Igboland, we're talking Nigeria. What are the new value systems that define Igboland and our accountability? What are the value systems that define Nigeria and our accountability? That the leaders serve the people, it's not the other way around.
I wanted to end this conversation on this note, but you just raised something that just touched the chord in me. Very often, Nigerians come to Rwanda and you host them.
Yes.
By your understanding, by your estimation, do you think they've learned any lesson, or they just come see the workings in Rwanda, everything, and they come home and they're the same thing? Each time I see honorable members, they say they're going to Rwanda. They want to go and learn from Rwanda. Please just tell us the experience with Nigerian visitors without mentioning their names.
Yeah. I'm still struggling to understand. Is when we have leadership of different committees of our legislature. They're coming to Rwanda to write their reports. So I meet them at restaurants and hotels. Sometimes I get invited to come and speak to them. And I'm like, Honorable, what has brought you here? Oh, we just had public hearings in Nigeria and we have come to write our reports in Rwanda. You want to come to write our reports in Kigali? We have passed all of the state capitals, all of the infrastructure, all the facilities in Nigeria. It's writing a report. We know that we have lots of Nigerian investors in Rwanda today. Why? Because the system just works. People in housing, in farms, Nigerians own farms. Something I need to mention which about Rwanda, which also happened in Botswana. You remember some of our colleagues, after we did our master's degree, some of our colleagues, we never saw them for years. Yeah. They went to Botswana. They became professors in the Botswana universities. They taught at different levels. It allowed the Botswana to build their own capacity. I was in Gaborone, December 2023. All of them have left. The Botswana have built the capacity. They are running their institutions. But from the 1980s, late 1980s, they took hundreds and thousands of Nigerians, Zambians, and Zimbabweans in their universities. Same is happening in Rwanda. The MD of the vaccine manufacturing facility in Nigeria, Mafibo. MD of Henneken, Nigerian. Deputy Vice Chancellors, two prominent universities, Nigerian. MD of banks, Chief of Innovation and Technology, most of the banks, Nigerian. So I have a WhatsApp group of prominent Nigerians in Rwanda. We meet, frequently meet among ourselves. UN agencies, some of my colleagues, top-notch Nigerians. So Rwanda finds expertise wherever you can get it, so long as it is African. Yeah. Rwanda will offer you the opportunity. But it's just for your time. Professor Kingsley Mogalo was president of the African School of Governance. He only left about 3 weeks ago. He was the founding president and vice chancellor of the African School of Governance. And Rwanda says the African School of Governance addresses a structural deficit in Africa. That public sector authorities don't understand what governance means. Public administration. How do you govern for impact? So it's a master's degree program in public administration, public financial management. Kingsley Mogalo was the founding vice chancellor. He was recruited internationally, competitively by Rwanda. We also have another Nigerian who's a professor in the school. So I ask myself, where is this? In Nigeria, we have the talent, but the same, where does he come from? Which ethnicity? Instead of what can that person do? We need to unpack our value systems, my dear brother, for our beloved country, for the transformation we seek. If we don't change those value systems, for our own generation. And that's what we want to hope to avoid.
Professor Nejelo, if I'm allowed, I'll continue this conversation. Of course, time is not our friend. So all we have to do is just thank you so very much for your rich insights. I'm sure I've really drank from your fountain of knowledge. Yeah, I'm sure our viewers are also doing the same. What have you reminded us? Now, while our traditional institutions remain important in communal conflict management, they need renewal, they need legitimacy, and stronger interaction with state structures.
Yeah.
So as this conversation continues, conflicts may be inevitable, but violence is not. When communities take ownership of peace, guided by both tradition and justice, progress becomes possible. And on this note, I want to say finally, as on New Jero Prof, thank you very much.
Thank you, my dear brother.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Same here.
Well, that's our beat for today. Join us same time tomorrow for yet another interesting edition beyond the headlines. Thank you very much and do have a lovely day.